And so you can see the crisis building. It's like, where's that human?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's not me.
Yeah.
I would love to be that, and it's not any of these characters I see in the story, but what if there was? Man, what if there was a human who that human's will was God's will, and their wisdom was God's wisdom? Man, that would be a pretty cool human.
Hello, everyone. This is Kenneth Padgett. Welcome to the Story of God podcast. Today, we have our second bonus episode for Season 1, Part 2 of a great conversation with Tim Mackie from the Bible Project. In Part 1 of this conversation, we began to work through the story of the Bible and think about God's presence with His people. Anytime you are tracing a theme through the Scriptures, you'll need to begin at the beginning. I know, mind-blowing. But my point is to say that Genesis 1 through 11 is absolutely vital for anyone seeking to comprehend the story and theology of the Bible. In this episode, we move from the call of Abraham in Genesis 11 to the new heavens and the new earth in Revelation 21 and 22. If you're not familiar with the Story of God podcast, and you're here because someone shared it with you or you saw Tim's name, let me encourage you to go back and listen to Season 1. It follows the flow of a picture book that I co-wrote with my friend Shay Gregory called The Story of God with Us. Like the book, this podcast is designed to help increase biblical literacy and cultivate a love for the author of the greatest story ever told. Now, one more note. I want to let you know that if you use the code Bible Project, that's one word, at wolfbanebooks.com, link in the show notes, you can get an extra 20% off of the Story of God trilogy through the rest of this year, 2024. It's already discounted for the holidays, so this code makes it even more affordable. So head over to wolfbanebooks.com to grab the set for your family, friends, or church. Okay, on to part 2 of the conversation with Tim Mackie.
Some people will say the Bible, creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And what they do is they talk about how God made everything. They talk about how Adam and Eve in particular fell. And then they go to Jesus and redemption and the restoration of all things. But there's stuff in between Adam and Eve and Jesus.
The majority of the Bible.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Huge chunk.
Yeah.
So if we're to understand this huge chunk as part of the solution, could you tell me how or tell us how can we process God beginning to fix things, particularly following this family?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's a part of why I framed things the way I did in answer to the first question, is that the majority of the Bible is this family history that comes from that guy. We haven't even said his name yet, I don't think. His name's Abram, and then it becomes Abraham. And there's apparently a great value in meditating on this family's history, that their own cycles of promise, experience of heaven on earth, and these little Eden moments that happen, and then the way they abuse, misuse, don't appreciate, distort all those little Eden gifts of heaven on earth towards their own ends, and then it creates this catastrophe, cycle after cycle. But then God brings some little glimmer of hope out of the disaster, like He called Abram out of Babylon. That cycle just keeps repeating itself. And what it does is every time through the generations. And so apparently there's great wisdom, the biblical authors believe, in studying the cycles of past generations, of the gifts that they were given, the way they responded to those gifts, for good or for bad, usually bad. But usually actually a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And then the catastrophe that results, and how God won't let human folly or sin cancel his ultimate program to reunite heaven and earth. But the biblical authors, remember, begin with this conviction that humans are this divine image, reflection, meeting place of heaven on earth, that God has given immense agency. So God's willing to work with us over long periods of time to let our choices play out and become the vehicle of his purpose, whether we mean them for good or for bad. And that apparently is an important lesson we need to learn from this story for hundreds and hundreds of pages before we get to Jesus. And the more years I sit with it, the more I see it's just the ultimate brilliant, like, chess player move. Like, God's outthought us a zillion times already. And there's a wisdom in seeing that no matter what humans do, our choices really matter, and they affect us and affect, like, what's happening in the world. But we also can't cancel out God's ultimate program to reunite heaven and earth. So that's really what the cycles are all about. And so the gift of blessing of a child to Abraham and Sarah is this amazing, amazing Eden gift of fertility and abundance. And then what do they do with it? Man, it just goes sideways. And so then God gives Isaac, that son, the gift of a family, and then that gets all sideways, and on it goes. But that's how the cycle works. Yeah, in the story.
Yeah, I like that. The idea of there's wisdom in seeing these cycles unfold in kind of a million different ways, but similar shapes.
Yes, the shape. Yeah, that's right. And the shape of God's response is very similar, and back to the words, worded in very similar words and images and ideas. And so the birth of a child is a big one in the story of Genesis. In Exodus, it looks like rescue from slavery. And then it looks like getting married. God marries a people at the foot of a mountain in the form of a covenant, and then comes to take up residence in their midst in the form of the tabernacle, which looks like a garden, that kind of thing. Yeah. So every time you're like, okay, so apparently whatever it looks like when heaven touches earth, it's abundance and blessing, divine presence. The veil between heaven and earth becomes very thin, but also it's always on like a knife edge, because God will let us choose to respond to that Eden moment and face the consequences based on how we choose. And so it sets you up for thinking, okay, God wants to bring heaven to earth, but he's not going to do it apart from a human partner who chooses it and wants it and is actually faithful.
Yeah.
And so you can see the crisis building. It's like, where's that human?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's not me.
Yeah.
I would love to be that. And it's not any of these characters I see in the story. But what if there was? Man, what if there was a human who that human's will was God's will and their wisdom was God's wisdom? Man, that would be a pretty cool human.
That would be cool.
And there you go.
Well, it's interesting, like, just these kind of like mini cycles that play over, and even on a if you think about the prologue, Genesis 1-11, you have this God creating a people for himself, putting them in a lush land. They disobey, they're exiled out of that lush land, and they end up in Babel, Babel.
Yes.
And the whole story of the rest of the Old Testament, God creates a people for himself, and the people of Abraham puts them in a lush land, flowing with milk and honey. They disobey. They're exiled. And they end up in Babel.
And yes, the same. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes. Crucially so.
Yeah.
They end up exiled in Babylon.
And I suppose, like, just I was saying the story, kind of Genesis 1-11, it's a tragedy, and you're like, well, yeah, there's this genealogy. There's this little bit of hey, something's being born here, something springing up from the ground or whatever, sprouting up from the ground. Similarly, if you ended at the end of the Hebrew Bible, you would feel like, I feel like this is a tragedy overall, but there's all these new sprouts that the prophets, there's all these new seeds, there's these ideas, these loose ends.
Yeah, that's right.
Leading to something. And we're, like you said, we're looking for a person, someone who can come.
Yeah.
So the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus. Here we are at the end of the Old Testament. How are we understanding Jesus in this heaven, earth?
Man. There's so brilliant, man. So each of the gospel accounts has a different way of making the claim that the story of Jesus is the necessary continuation of that larger drama. So Matthew, the gospel according to Matthew's way of doing it, is to do what happened with Abraham after Babylon, which is to provide a genealogy. So the Gospel of Matthew gives you a genealogy showing how Jesus is descended from Abraham, that guy, and from King David. So that's one way of doing it. The Gospel according to John just quotes from the first line of the story. In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth, but then he tweaks it and he inserts Jesus before he came among us as a human, as in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So they all have their ways of doing it, emphasizing that really the only solution to this crisis is for God to come and be the human partner that we are all made to be, but consistently through the history failed to be. And he is that human and succeeds at being really the first human. In a way, Jesus, as God become human, is actually the first real human, to which everybody before and after is just an image, so to speak. And so those are two ways the gospel authors do it.
Yeah, it's like this repeating cycle and this the shape of God's response and how this is working out. It's like Jesus comes and breaks the cycle. That's
right.
We think about like patterns of sin that get passed on from generation to generation and how Jesus comes along. He's that guy in the genealogy that says new way.
Yeah, that's right. I like
forward.
that. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the pattern.
Yeah,
the pattern stops here.
Yeah, and just understanding Jesus as like the God man. He's the like heaven and earth.
Yeah, that's right.
Like in his like being.
Yeah,
who he is.
Yes. Yeah, that's such an important parallel. The union of heaven and earth is parallel to the union of God and human in the person of the Son of God. There are two. One is talking about the environment, right? The cosmos, heaven and earth. And then another is talking about the key inhabitant of the cosmos, who in Genesis 1 was the link between heaven and earth, the human image of God.
So we have this story. The basic foundational framework is understanding God wanting to dwell with us, God's space, man's space, overlapping, interlocking. That's what he made. We lost that. And through the folly, human folly, and we've kind of been tumbling a little bit, a fish out of water, down the mountain, away from the presence of God in some ways. And then God's chasing us into the wilderness. We have these repeating patterns through the Old Testament following this family. God's got this plan for redemption to bring it all together again, which culminates in the person of Jesus, the God man. And how does I think often sometimes we think like it's somewhere in this God called an audible and he's just going to pull us all up into heaven for happily ever after. How does the Bible end? How does this story end that works as some type of culmination or consummation of what God started in?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's with the reunion of heaven and earth. I suppose if I'm being really concise, that's both how Jesus anticipates it. For example, in Matthew 20, he'll talk about the palingenesia of the land, the born againness of all things, the rebirth of all things. Paul will talk about a new creation, quoting from the prophet Isaiah, or the last book of the Christian Bible, the Revelation of John, will talk about a new heavens and a new earth that can also be described as God making all things new. And when he describes what he sees, it's of God's heavenly realm and city and kingdom coming to earth and remaking it completely. But then it's interesting because that remaking involves a whole bunch of stuff being left behind. And what gets filtered out, so to speak, is Babylon and all of its ways. And so through lots of different symbols and imagery, Babylon gets confronted one final time as an icon of all the human false Edens. And those have to get checked at the door. And in a way, this is not a way of framing it I had when we started the Bible Project, but it's become clear to me. It's as if all humanity and all creation to truly re-enter Eden, the heaven on earth, the reunion of heaven and earth spot. Remember, God posted some bouncers at the door.
Right, that's right.
Of Eden, these heaven on earth creatures, cherubim, and a sword representing this barrier of death, and then a fire, which is an image of purification and of unmaking so that something can be remade after passing through the fire. And so all these images are trying to communicate when we try and create Eden by our own wisdom, generated by our own distorted desires, it results in the world as we know it. And whatever kind of infinite life God wants to share with us, the heaven on earth kind of life, it's going to involve probably the death of a lot of those habits, the death and the burning away of those frames of mind and those value systems. And the kind of life that we think is life is really just earth life. It's not heaven on earth life. And so there's both a dying, of when we pass through, and also a rebirth, coming up out of the land again, in the new Eden, death and resurrection kind of imagery. And so this is certainly one layer of meaning of Jesus saying, to find true life, you got to lose your life. To really embrace the new heavens and earth, you need to take up your cross and follow me. That death is the way to true life. So there's some sense in which I and the universe as we know it needs to go through a kind of death, which will itself be a recreating into heaven on earth. And that's how the biblical story ends, with Babylon and all of that false Eden stuff getting burned away and left behind, exiled, so that the real reunion of heaven and earth party can begin. And that's how the story ends. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, so it is a comedy.
It is, yeah. Thank God.
Yeah, thank God, yeah. So then just, I guess the last question on this piece would be, so how now shall we live? We're clearly, Jesus has come. He's announced the arrival of the kingdom of heaven in him. He's the God-man. He's reuniting heaven and earth. He seems to be gathering up a people, and sending those people out. How are we, if we have this end in mind of this consummation, the restoration, the newness of what God is doing in that, how what does this mean for us?
Yes, yeah. Well, maybe back to our very first question. We're storied creatures. Stories are ways of reflecting in the storytelling medium our actual lived experience, which is linear through time, and we experience events, and we're looking for the threads that tie it all together. But there's like deep underlying universal themes in the human experience, which is we're all aware that there are moments we experience where it's just pure bliss, and we're struck by beauty and community and love and joy. But those moments are so fleeting, and they're so fragile, and right, and so subject to the withering effects of time and mortality and so on. And then there's just straight up horror of when the universe itself seems to not want us here, and so tsunamis and earthquakes, or humans don't want other humans around, and so we kill or marginalize each other. So there's all that, and it's like, how do you account for the beauty and the horror within one story and within one human life? And so, man, the biblical story is saying that the beauty points to the satisfaction and the giver of all of that bliss, and that ultimate bliss really is like a possibility. It's actually the desire of the beautiful mind behind this whole thing. But that beautiful mind apparently refuses to bring about that ultimate bliss apart from the willing cooperation of conscious beings like ourselves, and that we have a choice to make. And so that's what all the story was about. And so the story of the cosmos needing to die and be reborn, the story of this family going through cycles of death leading up to like Jesus Messiah, who dies and is reborn through resurrection, is also becomes a way of thinking about the story of my own life, that I myself am like an Adam and Eve, given moments of Eden blessing, and I'm forced to make choices with what I'm going to do with my life, and they can be for good or bad, folly or wisdom, and I'm going to go through my own cycles of like making choices that result and lead to my own Babylon. That God's going to shut down that project in His mercy and His justice, but what if there was a human who went before me to open up the way back to Eden, and I can ride his coattails, and he can teach me how to be a human? And not only that, but like, what if his actual life presence in the person of the Spirit of God he shared with me, and that slowly I am learning what it means to live in heaven, even as I'm here on earth, ahead of the ultimate reunion. That's for me, like that's what it's done for me, to live in that story. So my own life becomes a miniature version of the whole drama. And so does yours. And then we got to figure out how to live together and like be nice to each other. Because man, what happens when your version of heaven on earth is different than mine? And we disagree radically.
Yeah.
Like, what do we do then?
Yeah.
We got to work. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
That's a very big picture way. And that's what I'm trying to help with my kids, like help them see that this whole big drama actually is a way for them to think about the drama of their day-to-day lives.
Now, that's fantastic. I remember calling now Tom Inty-Wright. He has this saying of ushering the future into the present. Into the present.
It's great.
This active anticipation, living in the story. When we follow, as you were saying, basically Jesus is he's set the new cycle. He's set the paradigm for living in such a way. And when we follow his way, which is like why Jesus is why it's so important that we follow him. It's not just, teach them everything that I commanded them. These are not burdens. These are
the way to
blessings.
life. They are
but
life.
they run against the grain of that broken part of us, that has to be eventually filed off. So we can.
Yes.
But this is fantastic. So heaven and earth. That's we just kind of worked through the story of the Bible.
Yeah, we did.
Which
that was awesome, Kenneth.
Very cool. Yeah. You mentioned your kids just now. Like, what is Bible study or family discipleship? What does that look like in the Mackie household?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it keeps developing. as my kids develop, you know. So it when they were young, I just banked on stories about Jesus and like awesome things that he said and did and the ways he treated people. I had this sense that if that's the deepest memories they have when they look at this book, that would be a great way to start. So that's what we did. I'll tell you in 20 years how how that worked out. And then developmentally, as they've gotten older, so my boys are 10 and 12 now, it's just in the last, I'd say, 3 years that I've begun the habits of telling or reading some of the more complicated, morally complicated stories in the first 3 quarters of the Bible. But I have made the Adam and Eve story primary because it both helps you understand the story of Israel to follow through that cycles thing that we talked about earlier. But also, you know, the names Adam and Eve are human. Adam means human, and Eve means living one, so living human. So that it's also a way, the story of what they do with that tree is a way of thinking about the story of my life every day. And the choices I have to make every day are like standing at the foot of a tree. So sometimes it's in the form of reading stories. Sometimes it's in the form of watching the video. There's this great organization. Cool biblical theology videos. And so they're great, like, ways to tee up for conversation. And what we've had to change is our rhythms for it. So for, you know, because bedtime is a great time to do that. We have that for a long time. We use Friday nights as a big meal celebration to culminate into the weekend of rest, Shabbat or Sabbath. And so that's often a time that I'll be reading biblical stories or poems is on Friday night. So it just kind of changes as time goes on. In the summers, it's harder because there's a little less structure. But once school year kicks in, then we have moments of reading like a psalm. A few, you know, not every morning, but maybe like every other morning. Lord's Prayer, which in a way, the Lord's Prayer is a consolidation of this story because it's about may your kingdom come, may your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. It's about the reunion of heaven and earth. And so you can spend a morning meditating on that. And then every time you pray it, you're recalling the whole story, but just in the form of prayer. So I don't know. But I feel like the jury's out because I'm like in doing the thing.
I'm right there with you.
So I wish I knew how the story ended. And I do, but I also don't. And you just have to use wisdom. But I'm always up for hearing what other families are doing and learning other ideas.
Well, that's great. I mean, we, as well, as I mentioned before, you know, we try to do like a morning Bible time. I have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. You know, so I'm kind of right in that same their age
totally.
With you. But this is where I feel like the Bible Project or Bible Project now. I came in at the very beginning. So,
I still use the word the. Yeah, me too.
But this is where I feel like, you know, we're allies here, you know, and bringing these theme videos or these biblical theological treks through the story, helping shape. I mean, we watch Bible Project videos. We have the app on our Apple TV.
Oh, rad! Oh, cool. That's a good idea.
We'll usually, I'm going to do a little teaching, which I go long every time, you know. And so when I know, like, hey, we need this to be like 7 minutes.
Totally.
Boom. You know, which creates fodder for conversation for the rest of the day.
That's right.
You know, and my daughters, their favorite, my youngest daughter's favorite video is the Tree of Life.
Oh, that's a good one.
And I mean, just that I have an 8-year-old who has a framework for like understanding the Tree of Life and these visual components that you guys have done, which is so great. And then my eldest daughter's, her favorite is the Justice video. Which is great for understanding, moving into an age where interacting and just seeing more. I mean, her eyes are more and more open to
Yeah.
the brokenness of the world, and
Hmm.
B,
Hmm.
the kindness of God in it all.
Hmm.
You know, just seeing it in fresh new ways, and
Hmm.
the Justice video helping her
Hmm.
visually kind of process
Hmm.
who am I going to be in this story, you know, type thing. So we're very grateful for the work of Bible
Awesome.
Project, what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sitting down with me.
Yeah, Kenneth.
This has been
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Agreed. Anytime you can meditate on the story, it's truly, it's beautiful. Both the story itself, because it tells us that the most beautiful dreams that we have about reality are actually true. But also the literature itself that tells that story is beautiful.
Remarkable.
As one learns how to read it the way it's designed to be read, you know. But I agree, there are a few things more worthy to talk about.
Great. Well, blessings to Bible Project and your family, and just all the effort there that I know the Spirit is working in to bring about God's glory. And
Thank you. Thank you, Kenneth. It's been wonderful to talk.
Awesome.
Well, what a great conversation with Tim. It was a blessing for me, and I hope for you as well. If you'd like to learn more about God's presence with his people, go grab the book, The Story of God with Us, from wolfbanebooks.com. You can use the code Bible Project, that's one word, Bible Project, to get 20% off for the rest of 2024. This has been a blast for me, and I hope it's been encouraging to you. And I look forward to season 2, where we will trace the theme of God's kingship through the story of the Bible. Until then, may Yahweh bless you and Yahweh keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you.
This episode of the Story of God podcast was presented by Wolfbane Books. Please visit us at wolfbanebooks.com or on social media at Wolfbane Books.